Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by two special guests, Jessie Stolark and Madelyn Morrison of the Carbon Capture Coalition. Thank you both for coming on. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, the Carbon Capture Coalition was convened by the Great Plains Institute and is a nonpartisan collaboration of more than 100 companies, unions, and organizations working to build federal policy support to enable the deployment of carbon management technologies. Jessie has been with the coalition since 2019, working as the Public Policy and Member Relations Manager, and Madelyn joined the coalition in 2021 and now works as the Government Affairs Manager. Both have extensive experience in policy and legislative work and have advocated for many of the provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is said to be the most influential legislation to be passed for clean energy. Ladies, what are some of the most significant provisions that the IRA includes?
Yeah, so Danielle, I can take that one. I think you're very correct in saying that this is one of the most influential packages to be passed for clean energy. This bill is really a once-in-a-generation type investment into climate and energy policy, and one that is, really going to help shape the carbon management industry for decades to come. The tax-based carbon management policies that were included in the package really represent the most transformative enhancements to the 45Q tax credit, really since its inception back in 2008. And kind of coupled with the $12 billion in investments that were ushered in as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law late last year, the U.S. actually now stands to have the most comprehensive and far-reaching federal policy support for carbon management technologies in the world, which is really exciting. This bill really encompasses, a full portfolio of complementary tax-based incentives and enhancements to the 45Q tax credit. And, the first being a multi-year extension of the commenced construction window. Moving forward, any carbon capture, direct air capture, or utilization project that commences construction before January 1st, 2033 is going to be able to qualify for 45Q. That really just provides that critically needed investment horizon that's really essential for projects to be able to scale up between now and mid-century. On top of that, and if folks have been following the news earlier this summer and the negotiations surrounding the Inflation Reduction Act, a direct pay mechanism was something that has been on the table across clean energy technologies. And we were nervous that we weren't going to see direct pay in that final bill language, but we were really excited to see that not only is it included for direct or for carbon management projects, but projects are going to be eligible to receive direct pay for the first 5 years after carbon capture equipment is placed in service. And then that is actually even bolstered further for nonprofit organizations and co-ops who can actually receive direct pay for all 12 years of the credit. Direct pay is a super important kind of element here because developers, really sometimes don't have that sufficient tax liability to actually use the tax credits themselves. And that really hinders them from really deploying the technology at all. The current workaround is really for developers to go to the tax equity markets, where they then trade the tax credits for a lesser amount of cash up front. And, we found that that's really just inefficient and not really being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, right? Mm-hmm. So direct pay is really going to help address that loss of tax credit value by providing a direct payment to the project developer. And then as an alternative direct pay, the package also allows for the owner of carbon capture equipment to transfer the credit to any other taxpaying entity. So, under this option, the capture owner can receive a cash payment to transfer those credits. And then the cash payment is actually not going to be included in the capture owner's taxable income. And really, this just kind of provides, additional flexibility and making it easier for investors in carbon capture equipment to transfer those credits to taxpayers with tax liability, and really just creating a larger market for monetizing the 45Q tax credits. Additionally, a key element of this package and an important one for carbon capture, is its inherent focus on decarbonizing our highest emitting sectors, much like heavy industry. Mm-hmm. What we know is that without wide-scale deployment of carbon management technologies, it's going to be pretty much next to impossible to decarbonize this sector. And so increasing credit values for industry and power projects, which this bill does, really leads to millions of tons of annual carbon emissions reductions from, these high emitting sectors like steel, cement, and basic chemicals.
Yeah.
And not only that, the legislation also enhanced credit values for direct air capture. So, those are increased to $180 per metric ton for facilities that are storing that CO2 in saline geologic formations, and then $130 a ton for utilization and EOR storage.
Interesting. So do we see incentives varying from standard CCUS to direct air capture, and then also between sequestration and utilization in both methods respectively?
So, I think there are a lot of DAC heavy investments in this package. I mentioned the increased credit values for DAC projects. When it comes to standard CCUS, those credit values were enhanced from $50, which was in current statute from the 2018 revamp, and increased those to $85. So there's you've got the standard projects, which are now going to be able to receive $85 a ton, and then DAC projects, which are going to be receiving $180 per ton. And that is for specifically storage in saline geologic formations. When it comes to utilization or EOR storage, that's going to fall down to the $130 per metric ton. And then, on top of that, the bill actually also dramatically decreases annual capture thresholds. And this is really going to be a huge forcing mechanism for projects to get off the ground. And, decreasing these thresholds really opens up eligibility for a lot of smaller DAC projects, mm-hmm. To now be able to claim the 45Q tax credit and really make those projects economically viable for years to come.
Awesome. So with this tax credit broadening, what can we expect to see in the CCUS industry in the years to come?
Yeah, Danielle, I can take that question.
Awesome.
So since 2018, we've seen at least 120 projects that have been publicly announced in direct response to the 45Q tax credit, which is super exciting. However, to meet those mid-century climate goals, we will need to dramatically scale up the pace of project deployment across sectors, and in particularly heavy industry. And so with some of those enhancements that Madelyn went into greater detail on, particularly the elevated credit levels for industrial projects, we're anticipating hopefully greater deployment in those sectors. And so back on those 120 announced projects, they do span industries, power, and direct air capture. However, the majority of them are in lower cost of deployment sectors. And so that includes things like ethanol and ammonia production, sectors that are actually emitting a pure stream of CO2 as part of their industrial and processes. And so it's cheaper to capture and then, store and transport the CO2. So with those enhancements now in the Inflation Reduction Act, we anticipate greater deployment of the technology in key sectors. And so that includes heavy industry, things like cement, steel, and basic chemicals. It includes power generation as well as direct air capture. And then also with the historic investments in carbon management technologies in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was enacted last year. That includes, among other things, the Storing CO2 and Lowering Emissions Act, or the SCALE Act. And so that provides grants and low interest loans for project developers to build CO2 transport and storage infrastructure to ensure that we have the supportive infrastructure needed to transport and store that captured CO2. I think, the number one question we hear from project developers is, this is great. We're super excited about the potential in this industry, but okay, once I capture the CO2, what am I going to do with it? And so there needs to be other mechanisms to ensure that once that CO2 is captured, we can appropriately transport it and then eventually store it.
Okay. And I know the IRA expands beyond carbon capture too. There were many other elements of clean energy that were implemented in this, but is there anything that you feel like was missed in the Inflation Reduction Act that you would like to see included in future legislation?
So, because this package was passed as part of the budget reconciliation process, all of the policies included in the bill had to conform to the very stringent and sometimes inflexible budget reconciliation rules, meaning that, everything included as part of the package had to have some sort of impact on the federal budget, right? So for us, that meant tax-based policies. I will say that this package included all of the top priorities that the Carbon Capture Coalition had been actively advocating for, specifically in regards to the 45Q tax credit, since the beginning of this Congress, and in some cases even longer. When you have mammoth pieces of legislation like this be enacted into law and eventually implemented, there are generally small technical fixes that need to be sought as project developers, utilize the newly enhanced program. And so, we foresee that as that process kind of continues, that we'll identify some minor tweaks. But overall, we are ecstatic at what this means for the industry as a whole in terms of deployment, and really ensuring that the 45Q tax credit fulfills its emissions reductions potential.
Right. It is surely something to celebrate. Well, that is all I have for you two today. So thank you again to Madelyn and Jessie of the Carbon Capture Coalition for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. If you are ever interested in joining us on the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast, please feel free to message us. And until next time, have a great day.